The question. The fact that the best time of the year to repot bonsai is the springtime is common knowledge based upon decades of experience. But new findings in horticultural science shows that evergreen trees like junipers and pines can get empowered for their next growth season better if they're repotted in mid-summer. What are these findings based on, and will you recommend to switch the repotting of junipers and pines into the summer instead? Can you give an overview of species that can or even should be repotted in times other than spring? This is an interesting subject matter because I think people blur the lines between the rickety bridge that connects bonsai as an isolated horticultural endeavor from this larger body of knowledge that is horticulture and agronomy. So when you hear the idea that pines in the nursery industry, for example, are dug out of a growing field in the middle of summer, balled and burlapped, overhead irrigated at peak heat, and they thrive as a result, produce roots very rapidly, and are ready for export or sale on the commercial market within a few months of being dug. And you say, oh, okay, I'm going to apply that to my bonsai tree that has a completely refined root system in a completely aggregate soil, and I'm going to take it out of its very confined container that creates a very specific biology and a very specific horticultural behavior and a very specific horticultural care, and I'm going to abide by this horticultural knowledge from something completely unrelated in the nursery industry and apply it to the world of bonsai and expect it to work. And what ends up coming of that is a whole lot of pain in the failure of that operation, not understanding that that can apply to a tree charged with energy in a growing field and can apply to a pine under certain aftercare conditions and certain climatic conditions where summer digging works. Or it can apply to yamadori, where trees are going through a summer dormancy in the natural environment when they experience the first rain of fall or late summer, and now all of a sudden we have summer dormancy plus a moist root system. We collect the tree and we get to piggyback on vascular growth, but when we collect it, we have an intact root system more often than not, getting that pocket root from that rock-contained situation that stunts that tree. So to take all of that and apply it to bonsai starts to lead people down these paths of knowledge that is insufficient for the broad concept that's being stated. To this day, we do know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, your highest chance of success in repotting a bonsai tree is to do so in the early spring when it is stocked full of sugars and starches. The temperatures are cool, the daylight length is short, and the tree has the ability to recover after repot, moving into the growing season with the massive influx of water that's going to come into its roots to balance out the stored sugars and starches in its cellular system. We know that. There are physiological things that happen in the summer in terms of dormancy, restocking of energy after the new foliage has regained sugars and starches, hardened off, and prepared for vascular growth over the fall season. That makes sense that we would be repotting then, but daylight length is super long, temperatures are super hot, we're dealing with an aggregate soil system, and we have very fine, unnaturally small roots in a bonsai container that don't have the same stored energy or ability to adapt to that trauma under those conditions in the bonsai realm. And so I would say in general, the concept of repotting in the spring still dominates and should dominate, for the reason that bonsai is an isolated horticultural practice so unique from everything else, anywhere else, that anybody else is doing in the horticultural or agronomical realm. Now, having said that, do olives in their native range, and specifically in their native range, benefit or potentially behave better when they're repotted in the mid to late summer period of the time? Absolutely. Absolutely. Does that behave the same in a more temperate area of the world? Absolutely not, and spring is a better time to be doing that. So when you're in a Mediterranean region, an olive being repotted in the summertime, absolutely, and it works out great. For most people, it's not going to work out well at all. Do we look to repot any of the Japanese quince, where we're talking about Canamele species in the late summer, early fall to avoid root knot nematode infections in the root system? Absolutely. And does that apply globally? Absolutely. On a highly refined tree in the scaled root system of a bonsai container with a very minimal amount of impediment to the roots, that absolutely is practical. But an initial repot, a heavy removal of field soil, a secondary repot where we're gonna fully change out the field soil for akadama, it is not practical to be trying to do that major operation in a late summer, early fall repot. Do we benefit to repotting highly refined Japanese white pine at the tail end of summer dormancy prior to the vascular growth in the fall? Absolutely, to curb the loss of their terminal growth in the spring season, medomari, which happens very commonly in Japanese white pines in Japan that are refined and have been in a bonsai container for 50 to 100 years. That is something that you can do to avoid losing that terminal tip and the loss of that growing tip. Would I suggest doing that on an initial repot? No. Secondary repot? No. Would I suggest that as a general practice? Absolutely not, because we don't have white pines in the Western world that have been in a bonsai container and experienced that energy shutdown and compression for a long enough period of time where that spring repot is going to compromise their growing tip. So we have this information. We have these moments where this occurs, but these are rare one-off moments specific to environments, definitely dedicated to very particular horticultural practices, and oftentimes from industries outside of bonsai that do not cross-pollinate or relate to the bonsai practice, that we have to be very, very careful taking on that information and putting it into practice as something that we would dependably utilize that would give us a dependable outcome. Because the more that we push into these times of the year that have extreme conditions, where we challenge the energy system of the tree in the bonsai realm, the more that we sacrifice the certainty or the higher percentage of success of the operation. And it's my assessment and my assumption and my experience that when you repot outside of the spring season, you cannot give yourself the highest guarantee the tree is going to succeed, recover, and continue to thrive. Therefore, it's still spring for us, for almost every species that we will ever work with in bonsai.